Welcome back to another video, and yes, I'm making another video during the week, and yes, today is actually supposed to be my day off, but recently I started reading this article, actually during breakfast with my lovely partner, and then this article came up on my feed. I started reading it, but most importantly, I started tracing some of the surrounding discussions around this problem, and oh boy, I have certain thoughts, and I feel like this video is especially important and exciting for me because I just feel like this channel is built upon kind of debunking certain myths about education and debunking certain erroneous attitudes that we have around education. This is the very foundation of this channel. So over time, we kind of shifted away from that little kind of righteous indignation moment of being kind of dissatisfied with the state of things. And actually, 6 years ago, I published a video called "Why I Don't Care About Grades Anymore." And for the last 6 years, I've been trying to find that old motivation again. Not trying to find that righteous indignation again. And I think today's topic is just so ripe with this kind of surrounding discourse around literature. And of course, I'm someone who's very invested in literature's future, or the future of literary education. So this video is, it probably took me a few years to gather my thoughts on it, but this Atlantic article is just a perfect place for us to talk about this emerging issue of students not being able to read longer books. And I'm going to approach it from an angle that I recently devoted a lot of attention and thinking toward. So hopefully this is going to make a lot of sense to you. So this is going to be a longer one. So sit back, relax with your popcorn and with your headphones on. So let's get started. So today's episode is going to be a commentary on one of the articles recently published in The Atlantic on the 1st of October, 2024. And it's actually in the November issue. And the article was last modified at 10:57 a.m. on October 1st, 2024. So the article was published near the start of the month, actually the first day of the month. And I'm recording this episode right now on the 18th of October. So I've got a lot of notes on a surrounding discourse, and I've sort of compared notes with other people who I respect in the academy. And I've got some thinking around this topic myself. So this is a result of kind of like accumulation of many aspects of thinking. And here is sort of my educated conclusion on what I think of this entire topic of people not being able to read longer books in university. So the main arguments of the article, if you care to read it yourself, if you want to dive a little deeper into the literature, I would link that article in the description down below. The main argument is that students are starting to lose the ability, or in elite colleges, to read longer books. So the anecdotal studies are these professors from various elite universities, and before, I mean like 10, 15 years ago, they were able to assign massive titles like Moby Dick, or Crime and Punishment, or one of the novels by Jane Austen, and students were expected to read at least one book a week, or one long novel a week, or one huge novel in the span of 2 weeks, and that wasn't a problem, supposedly back in the day. But nowadays, students are finding it really hard to finish these novels. And the article also went into how there's been a change in how literature is being taught and assessed in high school. And the direct link there is that because we were taught to be good test takers in high school, and that caused a kind of replacement of great texts, the great replacement of where great texts are being kind of pushed out of the classroom, where kids nowadays will study excerpts instead of full books. So over time, this attention attention economy, over time we started to lose this ability to even read great books, to even sustain that attention. And there are really great arguments in this article, and there are some really solid points raised on screen time and distractions, and how certain mediums like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram Reels or certain online articles that you read, they are far more exciting for students to engage with than traditional mediums like a long novel or a long history book or some of these text-based engagements. So students are finding it increasingly hard to finish books. Students no longer have the ability. They can no longer jump out of the paradigm of being just a test taker, and then now they are sort of just completely losing touch with the canon or the canonical way of teaching literature in the form of reading entire text and analyzing and discussing these texts in detail. So it all sounds pretty good, and I, in fact, agree with a lot of the points in this article. And I think there has been a decline of attention, at least in my experience. Even though nowadays, sometimes I think to myself, if I don't deliberately cut out my media consumption time, if I don't deliberately invest solid effort into reading a book, for example, recently I started, I think, one of the more exciting novels I've ever started in a while, which is The Overstory by Richard Powers. And it's a really complicated novel, and it's a beautifully crafted novel, but there were cracks during the day where I feel like I can't really afford a book its full attention. Whereas before, maybe when I was in high school, when I had more time to read, when we didn't really have TikTok or Reels as the main dominant way of engaging with media, it was a little bit easier for me to engage with longer novels. But now I feel like I have to battle. So many things are battling for my attention. But it is the case where it's getting a lot harder to maintain your solid focus on one single thing. And it definitely is the case that students are struggling to finish complete novels. A lot of people are, in fact, during my 4 years at the academy, during my 4 years of 3.5 years of undergrad, half a year of independent research, and 1 whole year doing an honors degree, specializing in literature, there were a lot of people who struggled to read or complete assigned novels. There were a lot of people who, I remember this one semester, my professor assigned Ulysses, James Joyce's Ulysses, for a second-year class, and we were expected to read it in 2 weeks. So that's like 900 pages? Depends on the edition that you have, but the edition that I had like 900 pages. But we just kind of shut up and did it. So over time, we kind of were expected to do that, and it wasn't that much of an issue. But nowadays, given that there's not that heavy of a demand on it, I think there is a wane, or there's a decline of the attention muscle that's not being developed. But that's one side of the argument. But the side of the argument that I don't see being discussed a lot, at least this is what I'm trying to propose here to give you a different way of viewing this problem, is that most of the interviews conducted with these professors and most of these commentaries are, in fact, already from people who kind of know the value of literature already. They kind of already know why Dostoevsky is important. They kind of already know that, hey, Jane Austen was one of the most significant novelists ever. And they kind of know that, the value of deeply engaging with a modernist text is going to reward you with the foresight of being able to read whatever you want after you complete this degree. So there are many of these skills, or there are many of these sort of hidden discourses in the literature department that are not being explicated. So you won't exactly find a class that's going to teach you, hey, look, here's a pamphlet on why you should study literature. Here's a pamphlet on why literature is important. Here's a pamphlet documenting all of the most famous cases where literature just changed entire worlds or changed entire lives of people or, sparked a revolution somewhere. So I feel like the value of literature is just kind of taken as a given, at least in this article or by these professors. And there's always this hidden assumption that you should already know this. You should already know that these pieces of canonical texts are extremely important. You should already know that Shakespeare is something that you just have to read in this lifetime. You should completely immerse yourself in the poetry of William Blake over the weekend. So there are a lot of these sort of hidden assumptions that I feel like these professors are making without realizing it. Because for me personally, when I was in my first year course, I too struggled with reading longer books. I too struggled to finish that Ulysses reading in a span of 2 weeks. That was one of the most challenging reading programs I've ever embarked upon. And I too struggled to stick through, I remember Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare. And that was just, I remember it was summer, it was getting a little humid outside, and I would force myself to sit in a courtyard to read Shakespeare for an hour and a half before I could pack my bags up to head home. Right? So there are these windows where I too struggled with finishing longer texts. But it was this kind of understanding, because before I went to university, I was already running this YouTube channel. So I did my personal research on why literature matters. But that sort of struggling through the texts was backed up by a prerequisite understanding of why literature is important and why is it important to develop the focus skills to access these texts. And why is it important that we should read complete texts instead of excerpts? So if we dive a little deeper, the problem here is not with attention span alone, but there's a secondary problem, which is that even the discipline itself is struggling to identify what it's about. You know, can you ask a random English professor, you know, like Professor Smith, what do you think is the importance of engaging with Yeats's poetry? And most of the time, they're just going to start reciting a bunch of like facts. You know, it's important because Yeats was a part of the revival, and then the revival contributed to this part of history or that part of history. This is how it intersected with world literature. You know, they start to recite all these facts without really giving you why the fuck you should care about this discipline. There's a really great quote by a philosopher named Alain Badiou, which I'm going to read to you here, which I think perfectly summed up this problem of professors assuming that everyone should just basically know the power of literature. Everyone, if you're a human being, if you're studying the humanities, you should know this. And in fact, as a part of my body of work, I too suffered from this kind of assumption problem. If you click on one of my videos, I just automatically assume that you kind of understand why literature is important or why philosophy is important. But this quote here really struck a chord. So Badiou, in his book Conditions, which is really difficult book, but really worth it if you want to know kind of like what's happening in philosophy right now. He's one of the most original thinkers, in my opinion. But in one of the first chapters, named The Return to Philosophy Itself, the quote here is, quote, "Contemporary philosophy combines a deconstruction of its past with an empty wait for its future," unquote. I think the same is true for literature. For literary scholars, and for the kind of work that we're doing, at least my specialization was in literary theory, the kind of work that we're doing is a deconstruction of what happened before, or methods of interpretation that has already reached its peak in the 80s, and now we're kind of deconstructing that glorious metaphysical past while indulging in an empty wait for its future. If you really think about it, some of these questions that people who are well-read think are just self-evident. You know, the answer is completely self-evident. Of course, you should care about literature or the humanities. They're not too self-evident in the public's gaze or in the eyes of these first years at elite colleges. Not that obvious at all. So, for example, some of the most common conceptions, you know, why should I read a whole book if excerpts shall suffice? Is reading literature going to get me a job in the future? You know, what is the power of literature, and what does literature supplement that I can't get from a summary, from Cliff Notes? Or what is the power of close reading if I could just get all the conclusions from the most brilliant minds from artificial intelligence? You know, these questions, us as humanities people, we kind of like shun away from these questions. We don't want to answer them. Or we just kind of like finger wag at these people who are, damn you with your AIs and damn you with your emerging technology. You know, we don't want these new technologies. So we are starting to turn into the conservatives in this discipline that used to be really radical in the past. So now we're kind of holding on to this idea of like finishing long books reigns supreme. There's something inherent in that without really asking, where is the discipline heading? Where is this elusive value that we keep talking about with regards to reading literature? And I think we really can't move forward with the discussion. You know, we can deconstruct this article by The Atlantic all we want. We can point out its limitations. We can know that, you know, they're not technically interviewing students about this problem. Or, you know, we can debate back and forth on the conclusions of this article. But I think this article really pointed out an essential flaw in the discipline, which is we actually have no idea where we're headed. So for the remainder part of this video, I want to try my best to articulate, sort of based on my experience, what I think the value of the discipline is, or what I think, what's my purpose, or what is the sort of thing that motivated me to dig through longer books. Because I feel like if students don't define this aspect of their readings, and if the English faculties don't help students to define this, they will never ever solve this problem of students not engaging with longer books. It's just impossible. So I want to tell the story from the standpoint of being someone who's sort of, in a sense, already completed. So at this point, when this thing happened, I've already earned an English degree. So I've already done my 3.5 years of coursework. And I've had some really deep engagements with texts. But at the same time, the more you learn, the more you kind of like start doubting your own discipline. The more I started to wonder, I've read a lot of great books and I've studied a lot of these texts in depth. And I feel like it's starting to shape the way I view the world. But yet I still struggle to find that elusive thing that an English degree promised. And I still had an itch to scratch. So that's when I decided to enroll myself into the 4th year program, which is an honors program. So here in Australia, you do 3 years of undergrad, but it took me a little longer because of due to complications. My department from my previous university, which was Monash University, the theater program that I was a part of was actually shut down. So that contributed to this 6 months delay in my education. But nevertheless, so I decided to enroll in the 4th year program after my 3.5 years of education. So I did 6 months of independent research overseas, and then afterwards I enrolled myself into this research program. Essentially, you are paired off with an advisor, and then you're going to go off and do 1 year of independent research. And on the side, you can take electives, and it's essentially a mini master's crammed into 1 year. So I sort of started that program. And I was trying to answer this question, what is the value of literature? Why do we even care about it? I was trying to articulate that for myself because at the time, I too was like many of you guys. I've read books as a part of my degree, but I didn't understand why. And this landed me in a class called Exploring Ulysses with one of my favorite professors at my university, and I've actually interviewed him as a part of my Joyce documentary episode, so you can check that out in the description down below. So this class was so special because it wasn't just like a standard literature class where you would head in and then you get assigned a bunch of texts, and your professors would tell you to read the text and you go home, and a week later you all show up to discuss the text. But this was a 1-month intensive where for 30 days, I think. For 30 days, so that's like 5 days a week, 5 times 4. So for over 20 days, we were required to show up on campus every single day. And we would read Ulysses and discuss them in class for 3 hours a day. So intensive. So this is why it was called an intensive subject. So over the course of 1 single month, we needed to complete reading Ulysses, and we needed to turn up 5,000 words worth of writing. So that was how this course was structured. So during that time, we basically didn't engage with anything else but Ulysses. And during that time, we had such a deep immersion into the text over a course of a month that I feel like that class really revealed to me the power of close engagement over such a long period of time. And that class, I remember one of the lessons we were reading a chapter of Laestrygonians. And as I was on the train back home doing the pre-reading for Laestrygonians, there was a passage that was so good. I can't recall the whole thing, but it was a passage that I've read before like numerous times during my undergrad studies. But this time it really, it started welling up tears in my eyes. And that's when I realized this book has developed a language, or James Joyce has developed a language that can be found nowhere else in the entirety of the digital sphere. No one texts like this. None of the articles that I read from The Atlantic or The New Yorker writes like this. Even no other novels that I've encountered before writes like this, And I just had this split moment of realization that the true power of literature is that it is such an accurate mirror of the human condition that no other forms could potentially achieve. I'm a bit biased here because I really love literature, but you can make the same argument for film, theater, or, music. At some point, you're going to hit upon this essential fact that art in its highest form should be a direct penetration, a direct looking glass into the human condition, Whereas imperfect art or like immanent art, they're kind of like cracked looking glasses, where you can get glimpses into the human condition, but once you facilitate such a deep engagement with a great piece of work, you can get the clearest sense of what being human is all about. And that was what Ulysses was for me. And the interesting thing with that is that access was previously, that access to literature, that lucid access to literature over the course of a single month, engaging with one book, that access was what I didn't have before. And that's why I was confused. And that's why I kind of lost touch with why I started studying with literature in the first place. And that was exactly why, after that moment of engaging with Ulysses, after that intensive class, it was very difficult for me to reconcile with what I'm going to teach on this channel, because it is so difficult to articulate this value proposition. It is so difficult to clearly flesh out what literature can do for you, because we're all so different. Maybe for me, it's a direct access to human consciousness. Maybe for me, it's a looking glass into the human condition. But for other people, it's consolation. For other people, literature is a tool for you to get through a tough time. So we have so many different definitions. And I just think we're not spending nearly as much time diving into the why behind why we read literature. And I think it's really interesting because one of my classmates actually said that he believed that every book at universities should be taught in an intensive class, because that engagement is something that you wouldn't get from reading 5 books per semester or reading 7 long books per semester. But that total immersion over the course of an entire semester concentrated on one book, that's where you get those really sweet moments of revelations where your mind gets completely blown. And to conclude here, that's what I think is so... This is why it's so difficult to answer this problem. Is our attention span declining, or are we just running out of reasons to engage with literature that deeply? So I think due to a lack of funding to the humanities department, and as we're speaking here, the departments are getting ransacked, funding's being cut every year, so that makes it impossible for professors to facilitate so-called intensive classes. So if we're not providing students with these lucid access to why literature matters, why theater matters, why the humanities matter, then we can and we shouldn't be turning around to blame the students on why they're not finishing longer books, because they don't have a why. And that's what I think is where the future of the humanities is. The future of, at least for literature, is that we need to spend a lot more time articulating this why. We need to spend a lot more time asking ourselves the tough questions. How can we even compete with emerging technology? How can we ever define our value? And I think rather than publishing another study on some obscure writer from the 17th century, it's more valuable for humanities scholars to focus on this problem. And I want you to invite yourself to ask this question too. And I want you to leave your answers in the comment section down below. What do you think is the value of the humanities? And I especially look forward to hearing from you guys who do hold academic posts, who do work in one of these environments where you feel like students are not reading assigned texts. But I want you to ask yourself the question, why should they do it? What do you think the value of the humanities is? And how do you propose a better future where students are afforded the pleasure to study these disciplines? My name is Waldun. Thank you for listening to this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and goodbye.